Good morning, everyone. Hope you had a good time last night. At least I enjoyed the boat trip and the dinner very much. I actually got a question and a suggestion for you, Runa. Runa, got a question and a suggestion for you. Since we both have the same competitor, maybe we should join forces and see if we can buy them. At least that's my suggestion. I always talk to my boss that we should buy Microsoft Excel. That seems to be both our competitor. The other question I had actually for you is, what do you see on the ship weight calculation, the biggest error or missing factor in all of this? Do you know something that people commonly miss, like part of the weight calculations, like cable weights or equipment weights?
In Excel?
Wherever it comes from.
Thank you. Excuse me, I'm not sure if I understood the question.
What do you think, in your experience, is the biggest missing weight factor that people always forget to put in there?
Oh, I don't know if I have a single answer for that. It depends on the type of vessel and the yard, and how much into details you want to go. But one thing that's typically overlooked and that can weigh a lot is, for example, in the accommodation of a passenger ship, the mast that you use to level out the floorings, for example. And this is also high up, so that can be dangerous. Some are, put too much trust in the weight that comes from the vendors. They buy a big package of winches, heavy winches, and the vendor just has a thumbs up and say this is 20 tons, and it can be a lot more, for an offshore vessel. So it's. I guess I have no single answer.
Thank you. Just curious. So I'm going to talk about, yesterday you've seen what we're doing with smart production for the shop floor in particular. Today I want to talk a little bit more about where do we stand in the cooperation with SSI as such. See where we stand with that. I just want to give you a quick update what we have been doing so far. We have been talking to each other for a while. Where do we stand today and what do we see as the future for all of this? I tried to simplify the schema that you saw earlier today and yesterday from Nick's presentation as well, and from Jagger as well. It's a very confusing world, and it's constantly evolving and changing statuses in that side. Depending who you talk to, they always say that's the center of the universe. But I think in general you can always distinguish between three major groups that you see inside almost any company. You see the CAD PLM side, you see the ERP and the scheduling side, and you see the shop floor in general that you see. And all of those exchange data at different ways and different methodology, as you can see from any of the presentations that were given these last 2 days. So when I look from my own perspective, traditionally what you see is we work quite a bit with different vendors that provide engineering applications, and everybody provides a certain level of information about data that is available that I need to use at the shop floor. The same I need to deal with very often the ERP and the scheduling sides. People use different tools, different ideas, different breakdown structures. In the end, it all needs to come together. That's really what's the important of us. We very often see, depending on who you talk to, they have in-house systems. You have Microsoft Dynamics as an ERP system for managing the material and everything that goes along with it. And then at the bottom, you very often find the manufacturing execution systems, or Excel, as one of the most commonly used ones, as I just mentioned. So when I look at that, we go back again to what I showed yesterday. What are the processes between all these parties? Okay? If you analyze almost any yard, you can see that there is an interchange of data between all these processes, from engineering to procurement, from engineering to the scheduler, from engineering to the shop floor. But every angle of every line that you see in here represents an exchange of data to all of these parties. And that probably adds up to some of the confusion that we create ourselves. We build systems to communicate that, and very often we use the Excel spreadsheets, as shown in several presentations. So if we can actually make this more efficient, then I think we solve a lot of problems that were in today's world. And I think the digital hub is a perfect example. The enterprise platform that we talked about multiple times, I think Nick is already called Mr. Enterprise Platform, so I think we believe in that same story as well from a hexagon perspective. Okay? That really get this consistency of data, becomes reliable, and therefore it's a lot easier to communicate with each other. I was thinking a little bit about that last night. Let me ask you a question in that sense. Everybody using the bank applications that you have on your mobile phone, I guess, nowadays, to see how much money you still have left, and you probably know what the end of the month is, and we all have the same problem. Who calculated the last time that the account was correct? That the money that you had in your account is the correct amount of money while you have been spending your credit cards, your bank cards. When was the last time you did that?
Before in Europe?
I guess nobody did it. Huh? Everybody trusted that the bank was correct. That is what we mean with reliable data. Nobody spends time on checking this. If the data is correct, you simply use it. If for whatever reason you figured out, hey, the data is incorrect, what do you start doing? You start building loops. These loops take time. You check things, you don't trust them, you check them again. Then you don't really sure anymore. Your colleagues start checking, and everybody starts checking the things that they get. It's all about getting reliable data. Single source of truth. Your bank statement is your single source of truth. You trust it. By the way, I don't trust banks. Okay? Same here. Okay? If we look at where we stand with all of this, it's really important that we actually get to a single source of truth. Okay? And for me, it's really important that we move away from just part geometries. We need to know more. We need to know what the structure is of the assembly. We need to know the geometry, but we also need to know all the metadata that goes along with a part. As soon as we know that and have identified the single source of truth, the reliability of everything I do down here dramatically increases. And production is really very simple in that sense. It's almost like a computer. It is either correct or it's wrong. There is no in between. Because if you cut the wrong part, you can fix it maybe, but it's the wrong part to begin with. So in that sense, I heavily depend on reliable data from the engineering side of things. So what we have been doing, so one of the things that we traditionally see if we look at the engineering side, and that's a part of my vision that we have in here, I like to combine steel and piping together. Why? Because I strongly believe putting the steel in place, I think we're getting pretty decent and pretty good at that. But if I also have the supply chain for all the rest of the outfitting in that, I can do really pre-outfitting to a much higher extent, also from a supply chain perspective, which will be a next level productivity improvement that we all are searching for. But that means that I need to have a single source that manages these supply chains that go along with it. That's also the reason why you see it's not just the plate part, but I also look at the welds and I look at the pipe spools that go along with it. Because then I can actually combine all of these streams together and make sure that all of this is produced on time. And not by having separate systems like we see very often today. Oh, let me skip that. So what did we do? Talked to Nick, Dennis, in that sense, it's just fantastic to see how open they are and exchange all the data. So we exchange quite a bit of information between each other. I'm being Dutch, native language is Dutch, not English, not French English either, or Canadian English. So that's the first challenge we always face. Are we talking exactly the same language? You call something A, I call it B. For whatever reason, do I have the right interpretation? So we spend quite a bit of time understanding what is available and how do you have organize it on your side, and can we reorganize all of that? So geometry-wise, I think we were pretty solid. That's pretty okay on how we do all of that. You see the plates, we saw some assemblies, we went through a long list of information, and I think I've been bugging Nick quite a bit and saying, I can't find my structure in here. Where did you hide the structure? Right? So a lot of things we had to learn from each other in that sense, talk the right language, interpret the right language, okay, so that we established that. At the same time, we had our own preferred schemas as well. Okay? Here we see a combination of things where we combine data and geometry in single files. So it's a lot easier so that we don't have separate files, because you then come into the problem like if somebody misplaces a file, you come into the challenge that production can't do anything because it misses data. So if I can combine things efficiently, it's a lot easier to find that data, the metadata and the geometry that goes along with it. Also very interesting challenges that we always face with these kind of things is that every CAD vendor has its own preferred formats. Okay? Easiest example, plate parts, everybody likes DXF, DWGs. So we should be able to handle that relatively easily. If I then go to a next step and saying, okay, by the way, I want all my bevel data that goes along with that as well. The bevel data can change. Even if I look at a simple part, a shell plate or a bounded shell plate, the bevel can change. All of that data I need to have in order to make sure that I drive the machine correctly, assuming that you have a machine that can do this. If you don't have a machine that does this, you do it manually, which is also still options. But that means I need to provide the data to the guy who's at the shop floor to make sure he cuts the right bevel. Profiles is another example. End cuts, everybody has his own little twist and interpretation of end cuts. And I think the experience has learned that every end cut around the world is called slightly different, even though they look exactly the same. Okay? Small little snipe, little radius on it. One calls it R, the other one calls it radius. Everybody has his own unique names for that. Then if you solve that problem to begin with, then the second problem is these machine vendors, they have different 0 points. Where do I start cutting my profile? Do I start cutting the profile right at the edge? Or is the interpretation when I have a small little radius where the material starts, or the lowest material starts? Or is it an extended material? So we do all of this mapping, but that means that I also need to know how you define these macros to begin with. So we have developed quite a bit of technology around that to make that a lot easier and to make it swappable so that you can exchange depending on all of that. So one of the first things that we did is we actually extended our import capabilities also to reflect ShipConstructor. Because initially, I think at stage 1, we are looking at the point-to-point interface between ShipConstructor and ourselves in that sense. Okay. The way, since we're organized, we are now capable of actually very quickly saying, how do we map data from ShipConstructor into our system for plates, for profiles, and assemblies. Okay. And the assemblies is nothing else than your project or product breakdown structure. One of them. That's still a bit of a challenge because we learned within ShipConstructor you have the flexibility to have multiple of these hierarchies. I just need one. Okay? And that's where you see that the confusion very often arises because I can have 20 of those from ShipConstructor. Okay, great, fantastic, but just give me one, that's enough. That's enough for the production people. Which one should I use? And is everybody using it? And then it comes into, no, not everybody uses it. Okay, so how do we deal with this? So one of the things that we are doing on our side is we try to make our import functionality as flexible as possible so that you can actually rearrange it depending on your inputs. If you're saying my preferred way is to send data in XML, my preferred way is to send it in DXF, my preferred way is this, you can configure it inside our import module as such, so that you can deal with all these kind of different import functionalities that we already have available to you. That also means that if we can map all of that, and therefore I'll give you the functionality to, for instance, do the profile mapping. You have defined end cuts, you know what the end cuts are, and you could map them to what your customer is asking for you. The translation of 0 points, translation of locations is done automatically depending on the settings that you have inside the system. You don't need to worry about that anymore. That also means that corrections on material requisitions is done, because if I measure the profile at the shortest length, the maximum length, or the extended length, that is being taken into account as well if we do the nesting side of things. And I saw a roadmap, digital hub. I'm really excited to see all of this, because I think it's absolutely the right path in the future for making this happen and making the communication again happen, and ties back to what I mentioned earlier. Single source of truth is extremely important. This represents a single source of truth, which makes my product much more reliable, and therefore you don't do the checking anymore like you don't do with your bank account. That's really what I'm after with all of this. It's all new, so that also means that we still need time to study where we are, what it all means also on our development side. And I think we are taking the first steps to figure out how we're going to do all of this. And it's, in that sense, again, very exciting to see the vision and the potential for all of this to make that happen as such. The honesty is we are really at the early stages. We are right now really happy that we get geometry in, we get the assemblies in, and that's really the step one that we needed to do in there. This will be definitely a step two after we have learned a bit more about what the digital hub is, and again, I'm quite excited to see all of this. I hope I give you an impression on where we stand today and what our little roadmap is in this whole ecosystem that is being presented these last few days. So with that, any questions? And not about weight, okay? We don't do that. And I think I'm a little bit ahead. Thanks.
Thank you, Marcel.